Snow fell gently outside the Christmas Café, covering the streets in white. It was a cold evening, the kind where the wind whispered around every corner and the lights on the trees blinked like tiny stars. Inside the cafe, warmth filled the air. The smell of cinnamon, chocolate, and coffee wrapped around everyone who walked in. People laughed softly, couples held hands, and holiday music played in the background. In the middle of all this, a young woman pushed the door open. Her name was Lila Brooks. Her coat was old, her gloves had a small tear, and her boots were worn from too many winters. Still, her eyes held a quiet shine, a spark that made her look stronger than her thin clothes allowed. She rubbed her cold hands together and looked around for an empty seat. Every table was filled with friends and families, sharing stories, gifts, and cheerful smiles. At one corner of the cafe, near the window, sat a man all alone. His name was Evan Carter. His suit looked expensive, his watch gleamed, and his shoes were polished until they almost mirrored the lights above. Yet, there was something lonely about the way he sat. His eyes were on the snow outside, not the coffee in front of him. He looked like someone who had everything except peace. The staff had whispered earlier that he was a big CEO, the owner of a large company in the city. People glanced at him from time to time, but no one dared to sit near him. He looked too perfect, too distant. Lila noticed the empty seat across from him. Her feet were sore from walking all day, and she could not bear to stand any longer. Her wallet held just enough coins for one small hot chocolate. She hesitated. Would he mind? He looked important. Maybe he wanted to be alone. Maybe people like him did not want company from someone like her. Still, the sound of the wind outside reminded her that she needed warmth more than pride. She took a deep breath and decided to speak. She walked over to his table, her steps soft but unsure. Evan looked up, startled to see anyone approach. Their eyes met for the first time. His were calm and deep, but a little tired. Hers were open and full of courage she did not know she had. She gave a small smile and said, "Is this seat only for the elite?" For a moment there was silence. The words hung in the air like a question bigger than the cafe itself. Evan blinked, surprised. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. It was small at first, almost shy, as if it had been a long time since he remembered how. "Well," he said, looking at the empty chair, "I don't think it belongs to anyone. Please, sit." Lila smiled in relief. She placed her worn bag beside her chair and sat down. Her hands wrapped around her cup as if holding a treasure. She watched the snow fall outside and felt her heart beat slow. The seat was warm, the coffee smelled rich, and for the first time that day, she felt safe. Evan looked at her curiously. "You don't seem like you belong here," he said gently. "You must be cold from outside." She nodded and laughed, a little. "But warmth is warmth, even if it comes from courage to sit next to a stranger." He chuckled quietly. Her words had a simple truth that touched something hidden inside him. For years he had met people who wanted his approval, his signature, his money. None had ever spoken to him with such straightforward honesty. "Why did you choose to sit here?" he asked, still amused. Lila looked down at her cup, then at him again. Because it was the only empty seat left. And because no seat should be only for the elite. Evan leaned back, thoughtful. Usually he guarded his words carefully, always careful to appear confident. But tonight, something about her warmth melted his usual control. "You are right," he said quietly. "I guess I forgot that." For a while they both watched the snow outside. People came and went, laughter filled the air, but around their little table there was calm. Lila spoke softly about her day, about working at a diner and saving for college. She did not complain. Instead, she spoke as if each challenge was a story worth telling. Evan listened, his mind slowly opening like a window in spring. As she talked, he realized something. She had little, but she carried more light than most people he knew. She looked at life the way he used to look at success, like something bright waiting to be earned, not owned. The evening passed quietly. Her hot chocolate was almost gone. She thanked him for the seat. He nodded, still surprised at how grateful he felt for her company. For the first time in years, the cafe felt less lonely. And when Lila left that night, the snow outside looked softer. As if the world itself was touched by their small, honest meeting. The next day, the city was bright with cold sunlight. Cars moved slowly across frozen roads, and people hurried by with their scarves pulled high. At the Christmas Café, the same warmth waited behind fogged windows. Evan Carter sat again at his corner table, the same seat as the night before. He told himself it was coincidence, but deep inside he hoped the girl with the torn gloves might walk in again. He did not know why he cared. He had met thousands of people in business, and none had left such a quiet mark. He looked at his coffee, untouched as usual. His assistant had sent him a list of meetings and calls, yet none of them seemed as important. He felt restless, as if something had shifted inside him overnight. Lila Brooks had spoken to him like an equal. She did not want anything from him. She had asked only for a seat, but somehow that question had stayed in his mind. Late in the morning, the cafe door opened, and the small bell above it rang with a cheerful sound. Lila stepped in, brushing snow from her hair. She wore the same coat and the same tired boots, but when she saw Evan, her face lit up with surprise. For a second, she hesitated. Then she smiled and walked toward him.
"You again?"
she said with a playful look. "Still keeping the seat for the elite?" Evan laughed softly. "I was hoping you might sit there again." She sat down, warming her hands on a new cup of hot chocolate. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her eyes carried the kind of joy that does not need any reason. He watched the way she stirred her drink and thought of how peaceful she made the world look without even trying. So she said, looking around, "Do you always sit alone here?" He nodded. "I come here to think. It is quieter than my office." She tilted her head. "And what do you think about when you sit here?" Evan hesitated. He had never liked questions that poked too closely, but with her, they did not feel sharp. "Mostly work," he answered. "Sometimes the past, things that were easier once." Lila smiled gently. "You know, I think people like you forget that time moves the same for everyone. You feel cold, you feel tired, and you miss things too." Evan looked at her, unsure what to say. He had spent years hiding behind titles and business suits. Yet this girl, who had nothing but courage, had just spoken to him like a mirror. It made him feel human again. They started talking about simple things. Lila told him about her night shifts at the diner, about the regulars who always asked for extra ketchup, and about how she kept saving coins in a small jar for her college fee. She laughed when she spoke, even when the stories were about struggle. She made her life sound like an adventure. Evan found himself telling her about his work trips and how success had never really felt the way people imagined it. "I remember the day my company reached its first million," he said. "Everyone celebrated. I just felt tired. It was like climbing a mountain and finding nothing at the top." Lila looked at him carefully. "Then maybe you need a new mountain, something that feels alive." The words stayed in his mind. He had never thought of it that way. Business had been his life, his proof that he mattered. But what if she was right? If he had been chasing a dream that no longer wanted him? Evan asked her what she wanted most. Lila smiled and said she wanted to write stories. She explained how she loved words and how they made her feel free. "When I write, I forget how poor I am. The paper does not care what I wear or where I live. It just listens." He nodded slowly, realizing that her words were not just dreams but truths that built her strength. He admired that. She seemed poor only in money, never in spirit. Hours slipped by without them noticing. The cafe grew busier, yet it felt like they sat inside a small bubble of calm. When the waitress came to clear their cups, Lila noticed how Evan thanked her with genuine kindness. He had always given polite nods before, but this time his tone carried warmth. That small change made her smile. When the afternoon light faded, Lila stood up. "I have to go. My shift starts soon," she said. "But this was nice. Better than most Christmas stories I know." Evan looked at her and asked, "Will you come again tomorrow?" She laughed, pulling her coat tighter. "If the streets let me walk, maybe yes. But promise me something. If I am late, don't think this seat belongs to the elite again." He smiled as she left. Her words filled the space she had left behind. The seat across from him no longer looked empty. It carried her laughter, her stubborn hope, and a question that had turned into something brighter than snow. The next evening, the sky was heavy with clouds, and the city lights looked dim through the cold air. People hurried home carrying gifts and shopping bags. The Christmas Café glowed with warmth again, while outside the snow began to fall thicker than before. Inside, everything smelled of hot chocolate and baked bread. The bell above the door rang often as people came in, looking for a seat away from the storm. Evan Carter was already there waiting. He had come earlier than usual. His phone was full of messages from his office, but he ignored them. His mind was on something else. He looked at the empty chair across from him and smiled slightly to himself. It was strange how he now thought of that chair as hers. When the door opened with a rush of cold wind, he looked up quickly. Lila Brooks stepped inside, brushing the snow from her sleeves. Her hair was damp and her shoes were wet, but she was smiling. The cafe was almost full, but when she saw Evan, she walked straight to his table. "You kept the seat again," she said cheerfully. "Good thing I came before someone rich took it first." He laughed as she sat down. "I guess some seats wait for the right person," he said. She shook her head. "I think some people do too." A waiter passed by offering blankets for customers trapped inside. Outside, the snow was turning into a storm, and the owner announced that the roads were closing for a few hours. Everyone sighed, but the cafe felt safe and bright. The lights reflected on the glass window like stars against the night. Evan and Lila began to talk, their voices easy and clear over the sound of quiet music. They shared stories of their childhood. He told her how he grew up in a small town before everything in his life became about business and deadlines. She told him about her grandmother who had raised her and taught her how to find joy, even when life was difficult. When a group of children in the cafe started singing carols, Lila joined in softly. Her voice was gentle and sweet, but carried strength. Evan listened, and for a moment it felt like time paused. He could not believe that such a simple evening could feel more important than any meeting he had ever attended. Later, when the music faded and people began to settle, Lila looked at him and said, "Let's make a pact to tell one true thing we never told anyone before." He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "A secret?" She nodded. "Something real. Something about who we are." Evan thought for a while. He could have said many things, but inside he knew which truth had been haunting him the longest. He took a deep breath. "All right, I will go first." His voice grew quiet. "I am afraid that all my success means nothing. I have built something big, but most days I feel empty. Work I lead, but I do not know why anymore." Lila looked at him kindly. She did not look shocked or sorry. She nodded as if she understood. "Maybe you just forgot what you wanted in the first place," she said gently. "Dreams can get lost when they grow too big." Her words felt like warm air in his chest. For a moment he simply looked at her, thankful that she saw past the expensive watch and the reputation. She saw the man who had been hiding under the weight of his own name. Then she smiled and said, "My turn. I am afraid of becoming invisible. I worry that I will live and die, and no one will remember my name. Sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I try, the world has already decided who deserves to be seen." Evan stared at her, and then said softly, "I see you." Lila blinked quickly as if holding back sudden tears. "That is kind of you," she said. "It is not kindness," he answered. "It is truth." Outside, the snowstorm grew stronger, pushing people to stay longer. The staff lit more candles, and the cafe looked like a small golden island in the sea of white. Evan and Lila talked more, no longer about work or hardship, but about what made them happy. She said she wanted to finish her writing someday. He said he wanted to do something that helped others rather than just making profits. When the lights flickered briefly, she laughed. "Looks like even electricity wants to rest on Christmas." He laughed too. It had been years since he had laughed this freely. It did not feel like a businessman tonight. He felt simply human. Hours passed until the storm began to calm. People slowly prepared to leave, but neither of them wanted to move yet. Lila looked at the window and said, "You know, this storm kept us inside. Maybe it was meant to." Evan nodded. Then maybe this cafe needed a bit of magic tonight. When they finally stepped outside, the world was quiet, and the snow stopped falling, and the sky was soft and white. As Lila walked away, she turned back to wave at him. For the first time in years, Evan felt light as the air around him. He knew that something had changed. Simple promise shared in the warmth of a storm had left him feeling alive again. Days passed after the night of the snowstorm. The city returned to its normal, fast rhythm. Streets were busy again, shops were open, and the Christmas lights kept glowing across rooftops. Yet for Evan Carter, nothing felt the same anymore. He sat at his office desk, surrounded by expensive furniture and the quiet hum of machines, but his heart was somewhere else. He missed the sound of Lila's laughter, the way she looked at life, and how she spoke about her dreams as if they were lanterns floating in the air. Her words had stayed in his mind like a gentle echo. Evan looked at the view from his tall window. The city stretched far below him with cars flashing like tiny sparks. He thought of Leela walking through those streets, working long shifts, just to save small amounts of money. He had sent charity checks before, sponsored events, and given speeches, but for the first time it all felt empty. Those acts had no heart. He wanted to do something real, something that could actually change lives. That afternoon he called his managers together. They gathered around the long table, surprised at the sudden meeting. Evan looked serious, but his voice was calm. "We are starting a community program," he said. "Scholarships, training, support for students who cannot afford education. We will build more than business now. We will build chances for people." His team stared at him, confused. One of them asked if this new direction would profit the company. Evan smiled slightly and said, "It will profit the heart." The room fell silent. It was not the kind of answer they expected, but no one dared to argue. Later that night, when the office lights went off one by one, he sat quietly at his desk and wrote an email to Leela. He did not know if she would even read it soon. He simply wrote that he hoped her day had gone well, and that her words about new mountains had inspired something strong in him. Then he closed his laptop and sat back, feeling peaceful for the first time in years. Across the city, Lila was finishing her shift at the diner. Her feet ached, and her hands were cold from serving customers all day, but her spirit stayed bright. The cafe where she met Evan felt like a small dream that had somehow become real. She had gone there once or twice since that night, yet he had not shown up again. Part of her missed him, though she tried not to admit it. When she finally got home, she sat at her old desk and opened her notebook. She started writing about the seat at the cafe, about the man in the suit, about how two strangers could meet by chance and change each other without knowing how. Her hand moved quickly, and soon she realized that she had written almost an entire essay. She smiled, proud but tired. After reading her work again, she decided to send it to a national writing contest. It was something she had always dreamed of doing, but had never felt ready for. This time she felt brave enough. A few days later, she opened her old laptop and found an email from Evan. Her heart jumped as she read his words. She could tell he had written them with honesty. He said that her view on life had opened his eyes and helped him remember who he wanted to be. She replied warmly, telling him about her essay and how it was inspired by their meeting. She did not expect an answer, but it made her happy just to share. Winter deepened. Snow came again, though lighter now, and the cafe stayed busy with holiday visitors. Weekly, Lila saved enough to buy one hot chocolate there, always sitting at the same table. She liked to pretend that the seat across from her still held his quiet presence. Evan worked harder than before, but with a new spirit. He launched the education fund, visited schools, and met students who reminded him of Lila. When reporters asked what had inspired the change, he smiled and said that he had learned something valuable from a young woman who believed that no seat belonged to the elite alone. The article spread widely, and people admired his new approach. He realized that doing good did not only change others, but also mended something inside his own soul. On one of those cold evenings, as he left a meeting downtown, he passed a bookstore window. Inside, he saw a display with a poster of the National Writing Contest. The title of one submission caught his eye. It said the seat that was not only for the elite. For a second, he stood frozen before rushing inside. He asked the clerk about it and learned that the story had reached the final round and that the writer was a young woman named Lila Brooks. He left the shop smiling. Snow fell softly around him again, just like the night they met. He decided he had waited long enough. It was time to see her again and tell her that the seat at the Christmas Café would always be hers. The plan was simple, yet filled him with warmth. That night, both of them looked at the same sky without knowing it. Lila sat by her window rereading the contest message of congratulations, and Evan stood by his office window watching the city lights. Their hearts were far, but somehow already closer than ever. The magic of one small question continued to grow, tying their worlds together like an invisible thread. Snow lined the streets again as Christmas Eve arrived. Every window in the city shone with golden light. The air smelled of fresh pine and baked cookies. People hurried through the streets, carrying gifts and laughter. Inside the Christmas Café, the same warm glow wrapped around the crowd. Bells on the door chimed every few seconds as customers came and went, leaving trails of cold air behind them. Evan Carter stepped inside and looked around. The place was busier than he remembered, but it felt alive. He wore a simple coat instead of his usual dark suit. His eyes moved toward the corner near the window where it had all begun. Same table was there, empty and waiting. Smiled quietly and sat down, placing his phone aside. He told himself he would stay as long as it took. He had waited weeks to see her again, and tonight, on Christmas Eve, he felt that the moment was right. The waiter brought him 2 cups of coffee, even though he had ordered only 1. The young man smiled and said, "For company, sir. It is Christmas after all." Evan thanked him and looked at the 2 steaming cups. He could smell the strong scent of roasted beans and feel the warmth against his hands. The empty chair across from him seemed to hold a memory rather than silence. The bell rang again. Evan looked up, his heart speeding just a little. Lila Brooks pushed open the door carefully, shaking the snow from her coat. She looked tired from the long walk, but her face carried that same bright look he could never forget. When she saw him, she stopped for a moment, surprised. "You kept my seat again," she said, smiling as she walked toward him. He stood and pulled out the chair for her. "I told you, it will always be yours." She laughed softly and sat down, warming her hands around the waiting cup. They both sat quietly for a while, letting the cafe's music and the gentle voices around them fill the air. The world outside looked peaceful and white. "It feels strange," she said at last. "We met here by accident, and now it feels like we are supposed to meet." Evan nodded. Sometimes an accident is only the way fate hides its plans. Leela looked at him with a curious smile. "So what brings the busy CEO back here on Christmas Eve? Do you still come here to think about work?" He shook his head. "No, I came to thank the person who reminded me how to live." Her eyes softened. "You mean the girl who asked if the seat was only for the elite, yes?" he said. That question changed everything. I began to see things differently. The company now runs a new program for students who need help. People are calling it the Open Seat Project. Lila's mouth fell open slightly. "You really did that?" He nodded, "And it started with you." She looked down at her cup, trying to hide the tears in her eyes. "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever told me." He reached across the table, not touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth. "You showed me what wealth really means. It is not money, but is meaning." They sat like that for a long time, speaking in quiet voices, sharing small stories of the weeks they had spent apart. She told him about her writing contest and how her story had been chosen. He had already seen it, though he did not tell her that right away. Instead, he asked, "So what was the story about?" Leela smiled brightly. "It was about a seat that was never meant to belong to the elite. It is a story about courage, kindness, and how people can surprise each other. It ends with hope." He grinned. "Then I know how it ends." She looked puzzled. "How?" "Because it ends like this," he said quietly. "With you sitting here now." Her cheeks turned red with a shy blush, but she could not stop smiling. Around them, people sang carols, candles flickered on tables, and outside the snow began to fall again. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had slowed down to watch. Evan took a small box from his pocket. It was not jewelry or anything expensive. Inside was a simple silver key with a small card. He handed it to her. "It is the key to a new study room in one of our learning centers. It has your name on the door as the first writer we sponsor. I want other young people to be inspired by you." Lila looked at the key as if it was made of light. "Evan, I do not know what to say." "Say you will keep writing," he replied. "I will," she said, her voice almost a whisper. The cafe lights reflected on the window beside them, making their faces glow in the golden shimmer. Ilela reached out and touched his wrist gently. "You know, I think this seat is not just for the elite or for the poor. It is for anyone ready to believe again." He nodded. "Then let us make sure it stays that way." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and calm. Through the window, the two of them looked like part of the light itself, sharing silent gratitude and quiet wonder. The city moved on around them, but in that small cafe, it felt like time had finally paused to listen. What began with a simple question ended with an answer written in their hearts, clear as Christmas morning.